Tonight, a European apothecary opens a wooden jar, and the powder inside was once part of a human body. The label says mummy. A customer may swallow it, mix it into wine, or press it against a wound. Physicians prescribe it for bleeding, bruises, pain, and illnesses that other remedies have failed to cure. For centuries, European apothecaries sell medicine made from human remains, and some of those remains come from ancient Egyptian tombs. Merchants remove preserved bodies, tear away the wrappings, and carry pieces of flesh, bone, and embalming material across the Mediterranean. In European workshops, the remains are dried and ground into powder. A person buried for the afterlife has become an ingredient sold by weight. Demand grows so large that dealers begin producing counterfeits. Recently, dead bodies can be dried, darkened, and sold as ancient Egyptian mummy to customers who may never discover the difference. The trade begins partly with a misunderstanding. The word mumia originally referred to a dark substance associated with bitumen. European physicians gradually connected that substance with the black material found on preserved Egyptian bodies. Eventually, the mummy itself became the medicine. Educated doctors prescribed it. Wealthy patients purchased it, and Europeans who condemned cannibalism swallowed powdered human remains while insisting that medicine was something different. Why did physicians believe a dead Egyptian could heal a living patient? How did one medical word change from bitumen to human flesh? Who supplied the bodies? And how could anyone know whether the powder came from an ancient mummy or a recently buried corpse? Tonight, we will follow mummy medicine from Egyptian tombs to European pharmacies. Examine the beliefs that made it seem reasonable and enter a trade where almost any dead body could become valuable when sold under an ancient name. Before we begin, you can subscribe if you enjoy calm journeys through the stranger details of history. Then settle back and imagine a quiet pharmacy where the most unusual medicine on the shelf has already been dead for centuries. The first thing to understand is that the word mummy did not always mean an Egyptian body wrapped in linen. Long before Europeans began grinding preserved people into medicine, physicians used substances known by names related to mumia. The meaning changed across languages, regions, and centuries. It could describe a naturally occurring mineral material, a medicinal kind of asphalt, a dark resinous substance found around an embalmed body, or eventually the body itself. These meanings did not replace one another neatly. They overlapped. A merchant might use the word one way. A translator might understand it another way. A physician could distinguish natural bitumen from Egyptian mummy, while an apothecary's customer heard only that both were black, rare, Eastern, and expensive. The confusion mattered because natural bitumen already possessed a long medical reputation. Bitumen is a dark hydrocarbon material formed naturally underground. It can seep from the earth, float on water, or harden into solid pieces. Ancient builders used related substances for waterproofing and construction. Physicians also treated them as drugs. Greek and Roman medical writers described different forms of asphalt or bitumen from places including Judea and the Dead Sea. They recommended it in mixtures for wounds, coughs, digestive complaints, skin conditions, and other ailments. These recommendations were not based upon modern clinical trials. They came from observation, inherited authority, analogy, and the physical properties of the material. Bitumen is sticky. It can soften when heated and harden when cool. It has a strong smell. It resists water. Some forms contain compounds with antimicrobial effects. To a physician working without antibiotics, laboratory cultures, or knowledge of microbes, such qualities made it an interesting substance. A material that resisted decay and helped seal a damaged surface seemed capable of preserving injured flesh. The idea was not foolish in every part. The conclusion became much larger than the evidence. Medical knowledge traveled through the ancient Mediterranean and the medieval Islamic world. Scholars writing in Arabic and Persian collected, criticized, translated, and expanded earlier Greek traditions. They described medicinal minerals from different regions and distinguished among substances that later European readers did not always know firsthand. The term Mumia became associated with a valuable kind of pitch asphalt, particularly one linked with Persia. Medieval writers described its appearance, origin, and use. It was expensive enough to invite substitutes, and unfamiliar enough that most customers depended upon merchants for identification. A physician in a distant city could read that genuine mumia came from the East and was useful for internal injuries. He might never see the place where it formed. An apothecary could receive a dark lump through several intermediaries. Each person in the chain repeated a name. Few could verify the substance. This is the ordinary beginning of many medical confusions. A drug travels farther than the knowledge required to recognize it. During the medieval translation movement, Arabic medical works entered Latin Europe. Translators faced technical terms for plants, minerals, preparations, and diseases that had no simple equivalent. Sometimes they preserved the foreign word. Sometimes they added explanations. Sometimes later, readers treated an explanation as a definition. Mumia moved through this process. By the 12th century, a Latin description associated the substance with material found where bodies had been buried with aromatic ingredients. The dark matter around an embalmed corpse appeared similar to pitch. If medicinal mumia was dark and bituminous, and Egyptian bodies were coated with dark material, the connection seemed reasonable. Then the boundaries widened. At first, a buyer might seek the valuable substance believed to coat or soak into the body. Later, flesh containing that substance could be sold. Eventually, pieces of preserved body required no visible bitumen at all. The ancient corpse itself had acquired the reputation of the medicine. A mineral drug became a human drug by a series of small steps. No single translator woke one morning and ordered Europe to eat mummies. No single physician invented the practice in one book. The transformation happened because several ideas reinforced one another. Bitumen was medicinal. Egyptian bodies looked bituminous. Embalming, preserved flesh. Ancient Egypt carried an aura of secret wisdom, and merchants had something dark to sell. Each step made the next one easier. By the time the jar reached the apothecary's shelf, the mistake had become tradition. To understand the mistake fully, we need to enter an Egyptian embalming workshop rather than a European pharmacy. Ancient Egyptian mummification developed over thousands of years. There was no single method used unchanged from the first dynasties to the Roman period. Techniques varied by date, place, wealth, religious practice, and the skill of the embalmers. The central problem was moisture. A body decays rapidly when bacteria, insects, and natural enzymes work within warm, wet tissue. Egypt's dry environment could preserve bodies buried directly in desert sand. Early communities encountered natural mummification before elaborate embalming existed. Later, embalmers learned to reproduce and control the effect. They used natron, a naturally occurring mixture of salts, to dry the body. Internal organs might be removed. The body could be washed, packed, anointed, filled, wrapped, and treated with oils, gums, waxes, resins, and other substances. The details changed across periods. Drying did most of the essential work. European physicians often gave too much credit to the dark coating. Not every mummy was soaked in bitumen. Modern chemical analysis has shown that bitumen did appear in Egyptian embalming, particularly in later periods, but its use was neither universal nor constant. Resins can darken with age and resemble pitch. Oils oxidize. Dust and decay change surfaces. A body blackened by time did not prove that it contained the precious medicinal asphalt described in a pharmacological text. The distinction would have been almost impossible for an early modern merchant to make by sight. A broken limb from a mummy might be black and hard. It might smell of resin, old linen, earth, and decay. It might contain bitumen. It might contain none. The customer in Paris, Venice, London, or Antwerp would never know. There was another misunderstanding hidden inside the trade. Europeans often imagined that the mummies reaching them belonged to pharaohs, nobles, or exceptionally ancient people. A royal corpse appeared more valuable than an ordinary one. Age and rank added prestige. In reality, the supply was far more likely to come from the enormous number of later burials available to looters and merchants. By the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, mummification had become accessible to a much broader population. Quality varied. Some bodies were carefully treated. Others received a cheaper preparation beneath attractive wrappings. The medicine buyer did not receive a labeled king. He received an anonymous fragment. The piece could belong to a woman, a child, an elderly laborer, a Greek-speaking resident of Roman Egypt, or someone buried without any connection to a royal court. The body might be 2,000 years old or much younger. The person's name, family, and place of burial disappeared as soon as the fragment entered the trade. What remained was color, texture, and price. For the Egyptians who prepared the burial, the body was not raw material. Preservation served religious and social purposes. The dead person required care, identity, ritual, and protection. Wrappings, amulets, inscriptions, coffins, prayers, and tomb equipment placed the individual within a relationship between the living, the gods, and the afterlife. Not every Egyptian held the same beliefs in the same form, and our knowledge remains incomplete. Yet one point is clear: the body was prepared to remain a body. It was not prepared to become medicine for a distant stranger. When a merchant tore away linen, separated a hand, or broke a torso into transportable pieces, he did more than damage an object. He dismantled a burial created to resist precisely that kind of destruction. The European customer rarely saw this context. A powder has no face. A fragment in a jar does not display the coffin from which it came. Grinding completed the removal of identity. By the time the medicine reached a patient, the Egyptian person had been reduced to a brown measure on an apothecary's scale. This reduction helped the practice feel less like cannibalism. A patient did not bite into a recognizable arm. He swallowed a prepared drug mixed with wine, herbs, syrup, or another compound. The color blended with other ingredients. The label used a pharmaceutical name. The seller stood behind a counter rather than beside a cooking fire. Form changed moral perception. The body remained human. The ritual around consumption made it medicine. Now imagine the drug arriving in a European city during the 16th century. A ship unloads spices, dyes, gums, resins, dried plants, metals, animal products, and medicines gathered across several regions. Some goods have crossed the Mediterranean. Others have traveled overland before reaching a port. Mumia enters this world of expensive imported substances. It does not arrive in a modern sealed packet with a manufacturer's address, chemical composition, batch number, and expiry date. It may appear as a blackened piece, a coarse powder, or a lump wrapped in cloth. The merchant describes its origin. The apothecary judges color, smell, texture, and reputation. Words such as true, Egyptian, Eastern, and genuine increase value. So does confidence. A seller who hesitates loses the customer. The apothecary's shop is not simply a place where finished medicines wait on shelves. It is a workshop. Ingredients must be stored, cut, dried, pounded, sifted, infused, distilled, mixed, boiled, or formed into pills. Mortars and pestles are essential tools. Scales measure costly materials. Jars protect powders from moisture and display labels that may be more precise than the contents. Mumia can be reduced further before sale. A hard fragment is broken. The surface is scraped. The material is pounded into smaller pieces and passed through a sieve. A fine powder is easier to mix and easier to conceal inside a compound remedy. The work produces dust. It enters cracks in the table. It darkens the mortar. It clings to fingers. No one wears a mask. The apothecary may handle several drugs in the same space, and cleaning between preparations does not follow modern pharmaceutical standards. Cross-contamination is ordinary. Doses depend upon the recipe, the practitioner, the illness, and the strength of the material. The mummy itself is already inconsistent. The measurement makes inconsistency look controlled. A physician might prescribe mumia for injuries involving bruising, internal bleeding, or trauma. This followed the older reputation of bitumen and the belief that a substance capable of preserving a body might help preserve damaged tissue. It could also appear in remedies for headaches, epilepsy, cough, digestive problems, and other conditions. Lists varied widely because medical ingredients gained new uses as texts copied one another and practitioners experimented. A drug famous for one purpose rarely remained limited to that purpose. If it was costly, ancient, and difficult to obtain, someone would call it universal. The patient could receive it alone or with other ingredients. Wine made powders easier to swallow. Syrups reduced unpleasant taste. Herbs supplied aroma. Spices signaled expense. Opium, alcohol, or other active substances in the mixture might produce a genuine sensation, encouraging belief in the entire recipe. The mummy received credit for effects caused by something else. It also escaped blame when the patient recovered naturally. Pre-modern physicians did not treat illness with one theory alone. Humoral medicine remained influential, but practice also included inherited remedies, local experience, astrology, religious belief, alchemical ideas, and a growing interest in chemical drugs. The body was understood as a balance of qualities and fluids. A medicine could be described as hot, cold, dry, or moist. It might open an obstruction, draw out poison, strengthen a weak organ, stop a flow, or restore a lost quality. Mumia could fit several explanations because no one agreed exactly what it was. If it was bitumen, its mineral properties mattered. If it was embalming resin, preservation mattered. If it was ancient flesh, the power of the human body mattered. If it came from a violent or sudden death, some practitioners believed the remaining vitality of the person mattered. Ambiguity made the drug adaptable. Whatever theory the physician preferred, mummy could be placed inside it. A patient did not need to understand the entire argument. He needed pain to stop. A man injured by a fall might accept a bitter powder if a respected physician recommended it. A family watching someone bleed could not wait for a controlled study. A person with repeated seizures might try almost anything after familiar treatments failed. Desperation enlarges the market for uncertain medicine. So does status. A rare drug imported from Egypt demonstrated that the household could afford more than common herbs. The remedy carried geography with it. Arabia, Persia, and Egypt were associated in European imagination with ancient learning, spices, alchemy, and secrets unavailable in an ordinary field. Exotic origin became evidence. The farther the medicine traveled, the harder it was to question the story attached to it. A village healer could identify the plant growing beside the road. No one in the room could identify a black powder said to come from a tomb near Cairo. The mystery protected the merchant. The pharmacy label made the medicine appear stable, but the contents could vary from one jar to the next. One batch might contain material from an ancient Egyptian body. Another might contain resin scraped from wrappings. Another could include dirt, linen, bone, and whatever the grinder failed to remove. A darker powder might be valued more highly because customers expected mumia to look like pitch. This encouraged sellers to add substances that improved color rather than medical quality. Authenticity became a performance. The apothecary examined the powder. The merchant described a tomb. The physician repeated a learned name. The patient swallowed trust. Consider what happened after the dose. If the powder contained mostly inert, dried material, the patient might experience little beyond taste and disgust. If it contained resin, bitumen, mold, soil, heavy metals, microorganisms, or substances used during counterfeiting, it could irritate the stomach or cause other harm. Grinding did not sterilize the body. Age did not guarantee safety. Preservation is not the same as purity. Ancient tissue can retain environmental contaminants. Embalming substances vary. A recently prepared counterfeit may carry the cause of death, decomposition products, or added chemicals. None of this could be tested reliably in an early modern shop. The patient might vomit. A defender of the drug could interpret vomiting as proof that the medicine had expelled something harmful. The same symptom that revealed toxicity could be renamed treatment. This pattern appears repeatedly in medical history. A remedy causes sweating, bleeding, purging, pain, or exhaustion. Because the body visibly reacts, the practitioner believes the drug is working. Powerful effect becomes confused with beneficial effect. Mumia did not always produce a dramatic reaction, but its reputation belonged to a culture comfortable with forceful intervention. Patients were bled, purged, blistered, cauterized, and given complex compounds. A quiet powder from a corpse was not automatically the strangest item in the prescription. The risk also disappeared inside the patient's original illness. If a severely injured person died after taking mummy, the injury received blame. If the patient survived, the remedy received praise. This is a perfect system for preserving belief. Failure proves the illness was too strong. Success proves the medicine was strong enough. Only careful comparison can break the circle. And careful comparison was difficult to organize. Some people undoubtedly felt better after taking preparations containing mummy. Pain changes, bruises heal, bleeding stops, seizures can occur irregularly. Many illnesses resolve without intervention. Alcohol calms fear. Opium reduces suffering. Attention from an expensive physician reassures the patient. These effects are real. Even when the explanation is wrong, the mistake lies in assigning them to powdered human remains. There may also have been limited physical reasons behind the earliest reputation of bitumen. Certain natural bitumens contain compounds capable of inhibiting some microbes. A sticky preparation could protect a surface. A mineral mixture, applied externally, might behave differently from corpse powder swallowed internally. The original drug and the later drug were not equivalent. That distinction was lost. A useful property in one material became a universal promise attached to another. The journey from mineral asphalt to ancient flesh therefore did not require complete irrationality. It required a plausible beginning, uncertain translation, commercial interest, and centuries of repetition. History often creates its strangest medicines this way, not from one enormous act of madness. From many reasonable-looking decisions placed in the wrong order, the supply chain began where the dead were easiest to reach. Egypt contained burial grounds, holding enormous numbers of preserved human and animal bodies. Some tombs had been robbed in antiquity. Others were opened by local diggers, travelers, dealers, officials, and people searching for valuables. Gold, amulets, jewelry, linen, coffins, and bodies all entered markets. The medicinal trade was one reason among many. A European customer might imagine a carefully selected royal mummy removed from a hidden chamber. The reality could be less impressive. Bodies were found in crowded burial areas, caves, shafts, damaged tombs, and desert cemeteries. A dealer wanted transportable material. Whole coffins occupied space. Broken limbs and torsos could be packed more easily. Wrappings were cut. Hands and feet were separated. Heads became curiosities. Flesh became drug. The body passed through several economies at once. An amulet could be sold to a collector. Linen could be reused or discarded. A decorated coffin might interest a wealthy visitor. The dark remains went to the medical buyer. Nothing needed to stay together. Local authorities did not always permit the trade. Restrictions on opening graves and exporting bodies appeared at different times, but enforcement was uneven. Officials could be bribed, goods could be mislabeled. Smuggling grew wherever prohibition met profit. The dealer could move mummy as a medicine rather than an antiquity. Medicine justified possession. A broken body became cargo. In 1586, an English merchant named John Sanderson entered Egyptian tombs and described what he found. He was lowered by rope with candles. Inside were bodies of different sizes, darkened and preserved. He broke parts away to examine how the flesh had changed. Sanderson later wrote that he brought back heads, hands, arms, feet, a whole body, and hundreds of pounds of material. The account is valuable because it removes the clean distance of the pharmacy. Here is the moment before the powder. A living merchant walks over bodies. He tests them by breaking them. He selects pieces for display and pieces for trade. The tomb becomes a warehouse before the goods ever reach a port. Sanderson's description also shows how curiosity and commerce overlapped. He did not take only medicine. He brought parts as objects to show. A hand or head could impress visitors. A whole mummy proved access to Egypt. The same journey supplied the cabinet and the drug shop. Later, European mummy culture would expand in exactly this direction. The body could be medicine. It could be a scientific specimen. It could be entertainment. It could be pigment. It could be a souvenir placed on a mantelpiece. The category changed according to the buyer. The person remained dead through all of them. Transportation damaged what looting had already disturbed. Heat, humidity, salt air, insects, and rough handling affected the remains. Wrappings crumbled, limbs separated, labels disappeared. Material from several bodies could mix inside a container. By the time the shipment arrived, claims of identity or age depended almost entirely upon the merchant's word. A body that had survived centuries in the desert could be destroyed within months by trade. This destruction was useful to the seller. Broken material was harder to investigate. A customer could not ask whether one powder came from a complete ancient burial if no complete burial remained. The trade also depended upon local labor that European accounts often ignore. Someone located the tomb. Someone carried tools and ropes. Someone opened the shaft. Someone entered a dangerous space. Someone wrapped the fragments, moved them to a town, negotiated with officials, and loaded them onto a ship. The European merchant appears in the written record because he wrote the account. The Egyptian workers who made the account possible often remain unnamed. Their motives could include poverty, opportunity, coercion, or participation in an established antiquities market. We should not turn them into simple villains. The largest profits and the strongest demand often came from elsewhere. European medicine created value in the dead. Local people responded to the market. The body's long journey ended in a small quantity. A tomb might contain an entire person. A ship carried hundreds of pounds. An apothecary sold a few drachms. The patient swallowed a spoonful. Scale concealed violence. The dose looked tiny. The system behind it was not. Whenever a product is rare, expensive, and difficult to verify, fraud follows. Mumia was almost designed for counterfeiting. Customers expected it to be dark. They expected an unpleasant smell. They expected ancient origin, but had no method to measure age. They expected a human substance already broken beyond recognition. A false product needed only to resemble decay. 16th century travelers and physicians reported several forms of deception. Toasted or dried animal flesh could be sold as human mummy. Camel meat appeared in some accounts. Recently, dead people could be treated with bitumen or pitch, dried, and presented as ancient Egyptian remains. Bodies of enslaved people, executed criminals, travelers, and the poor were especially vulnerable because fewer powerful relatives could defend them. The trade did not require a counterfeit to survive for centuries. It needed to survive an inspection in a shop. In 1564, the French physician Guy de la Fontaine visited Alexandria and investigated the mummy market. According to later accounts, a dealer showed him bodies that had been prepared locally rather than taken from ancient tombs. The merchant reportedly collected dead people without caring what disease had killed them. Once the bodies were treated and darkened, customers could not distinguish them from the ancient product they expected. This revelation should have ended confidence. It did not. The word genuine became more important as fraud became better known. Apothecaries used expressions equivalent to true Egyptian mummy. The label promised origin and quality. It also admitted that false mummy existed. A customer, seeing the word true, might feel reassured. A more cautious customer would ask why the reassurance was necessary. The market answered doubt with stronger advertising. Counterfeiters understood that people bought a story as much as a substance. An ancient corpse suggested long preservation. A young corpse suggested vitality. A body dried in desert sand looked naturally cured. A criminal who died violently could be described as retaining unusual force. Different medical theories created markets for different dead people. If Egyptian age was unavailable, recent death could become a selling point. The counterfeit did not always imitate the same value. Sometimes it offered a new one. This wider trade moved European medicine beyond Egyptian mummy into what historians now call corpse medicine. Human skull was powdered for disorders of the head. Blood was consumed for conditions including epilepsy. Human fat was rubbed onto wounds and painful joints. Moss growing on skulls could enter remedies. Parts of executed bodies were especially valued because sudden death was believed to leave vitality trapped within the flesh. The line between ancient mummy and recent corpse became increasingly thin. A physician might prefer one. An apothecary might sell both. Fraud also exposed a deeper problem. What did authenticity mean? If the original medicinal Mumia was natural bitumen, then even genuine Egyptian flesh could be the wrong drug. If the desired substance was embalming resin, a piece of body without resin was poor quality. If the body itself held power, recent flesh might be as effective as ancient flesh. The market argued over authenticity before agreeing on the object being authenticated. This made certainty impossible. A seller could always redefine the product after inspection. The customer paid for trust, and trust followed social reputation. A respected physician's prescription made the ingredient respectable. A royal patient made it fashionable. A learned book made it ancient. A decorated jar made it orderly. Each layer protected the powder from the obvious question, whose body is this? The answer was almost never available. The absence of identity was treated as normal. In a modern transplant system, the human origin of tissue demands documentation, consent, testing, and traceability. In the mummy trade, human origin increased value while traceability disappeared. The less anyone knew about the person, the easier the person was to sell. Not every physician accepted the trade. One of its most famous critics was Ambroise Paré, the French surgeon who served several kings and wrote from long experience treating wounds. Paré lived in a medical world filled with inherited authority, but he did not believe authority should be accepted without observation. His surgical writings often compared recommended treatments with what he had seen in practice. Mummy failed that comparison. In 1582, Paré published a discourse attacking the use of mumia. He described the history claimed for the substance, the trade in bodies, and the way fraudulent mummy was manufactured. He rejected both the medicine and the cruelty behind it. According to Paré, mummy did not stop bleeding as promised. He had seen patients develop stomach pain, foul breath, and violent vomiting after taking it. The drug intended to control blood could disturb the body further. His objection was practical. The medicine did not work. It could make people worse. Paré also questioned the source. He knew that European buyers were unlikely to receive carefully embalmed ancient elites. Dealers supplied the bodies of ordinary and recently dead people. The material could contain whatever had caused their deaths. A physician could not inspect the original body. He could not know the preparation. He could not know what else had been added. This is a recognizably modern concern. Unknown composition makes safe dosing impossible. Paré's criticism did not come from squeamishness alone. Surgeons were familiar with blood, damaged tissue, amputation, infection, and death. He did not reject mummy because the body was unpleasant to look at. He rejected a false claim. That difference matters. Disgust can identify a danger, but it can also reject useful medicine. Evidence must do more than produce revulsion. Paré observed effects, considered supply, and compared promise with result. He gave the trade an enemy it could not dismiss as ignorance. Yet mummy remained available. Why? Because one critical book rarely overturns an established medical habit. Physicians disagreed. Patients asked for familiar remedies. Apothecaries held stock. Merchants defended income. Older authorities still carried weight. A practitioner who had prescribed mummy successfully for years could reinterpret Paré's failures as bad quality, wrong dose, or incorrect use. The response to criticism was not necessarily to abandon the drug. It was to demand better mummy. This is another durable pattern. When a remedy cannot prove itself consistently, defenders divide the failures from the true product. The medicine failed because it was counterfeit. It failed because the patient was too weak. It failed because the physician used the wrong wine. It failed because the body was too old. It failed because the body was not old enough. Every failure protects an invisible ideal version. No one can produce that ideal reliably. The belief survives. Paré's own status also complicated the debate. He was a surgeon, and surgery occupied a different position from university medicine. Learned physicians could regard practical operators as socially or intellectually inferior, even when those operators possessed deeper experience with wounds. The conflict over mummy, therefore, touched professional rivalry. Who had authority to judge a drug? The scholar who knew the texts? The apothecary who handled the substance? The The surgeon who watched the patient bleed, the merchant who claimed to know the source, each held one part of the chain. No one controlled the whole. Paré's criticism became more persuasive over time because the world around the drug changed. Chemical analysis improved. Pharmacy became more regulated. Natural history distinguished minerals from body preparations more carefully. Medical writers demanded clearer ingredients. The exotic authority of Egypt weakened when travelers brought more direct observation. Mumia did not disappear at once. It lost the protection of mystery, one argument at a time. The persistence of mummy also makes more sense when placed beside other early modern medicines. An apothecary shelf contained materials that modern customers would find familiar. Mint, fennel, opium, senna, honey, alcohol, mineral salts, and plant oils. It also contained substances that now sound impossible. Powdered horn, animal dung, dried insects, precious stones, mercury compounds, human skull. Complex mixtures could combine dozens of ingredients selected from several traditions. Mummy did not stand alone as the only strange jar in a rational shop. It belonged to a crowded medical universe. Some ingredients worked. Some worked in limited ways. Some were useless. Some were actively poisonous. The practitioner did not possess a simple method for separating them. A medicine could remain in use because one component helped while another carried the reputation. Opium reduced pain. Alcohol changed mood. Astringent plants slowed minor bleeding. Honey protected some wounds. The mummy powder inside the same recipe gained credit for the result. Complexity concealed causation. Medical books copied older recipes because preservation of knowledge was valuable. Removing an ingredient required confidence that the old authority was wrong. Adding an ingredient felt safer than omission. A rare substance also made a recipe distinctive. An ordinary healer could offer herbs. A royal physician could offer mummy from Egypt. Prestige became part of treatment. Royal use strengthened the reputation, though many famous stories should be repeated carefully. Francis I of France is often said to have carried mummy medicine as protection against injury, particularly while hunting, and to have taken it with rhubarb. The story appears frequently in later histories. Whether every detail can be confirmed from contemporary evidence is less important than what the tradition reveals. People believed mummy belonged near a king. A medicine associated with royalty acquired value in ordinary shops. The king's body served as advertisement. Royal medicine was not necessarily better medicine. Court physicians faced political pressure. A king's illness affected government. Several practitioners might compete beside the bed. Treatments were recorded, repeated, and defended with unusual intensity. Expensive ingredients reassured the court that everything possible had been attempted. Failure could not be blamed upon economy. A simple remedy looked careless. A complex one looked serious. Mummy benefited from the performance of effort. The patient's social world also influenced recovery. Taking an exotic medicine created expectation. Family members watched. The physician returned. The household adjusted food, rest, heat, and attention. Improvement followed the entire change in care, not only the powder. Modern researchers call part of this the placebo effect, but the term can be misleading when used casually. Expectation does not make an imaginary illness. Pain, nausea, anxiety, and fatigue respond to context through real biological pathways. A patient can genuinely feel better after an ineffective drug. That experience becomes testimony. Testimony sells the next dose. Mummy medicine also promised control over accidents. Bleeding and trauma are frightening because they happen quickly. A person falls from a horse, a soldier receives a wound, a worker is crushed. The body changes in seconds. A portable powder offered immediate action. Mix it, swallow it, apply it. Waiting felt dangerous. The drug gave the household something to do. Its emotional usefulness may have outlived its medical usefulness. The same promise survives in modern miracle products. They appear where fear is strongest and evidence is hardest to evaluate. They offer ancient wisdom, secret origin, universal action, and personal testimony. They accuse critics of ignoring tradition. They explain failure through purity. The jar changes. The sales method remains familiar. Mumia is not strange because people in the past were uniquely gullible. It is strange because the mechanisms that protected it are still recognizable. The wider culture of corpse medicine deserves careful attention because mummy was only its most geographically dramatic form. Early modern Europeans used parts of recently dead people in treatments. The practice appeared in learned medicine, household recipes, folk traditions, and court preparations. Human skull became one of the most famous materials. Powdered skull could be prescribed for epilepsy, bleeding in the brain, or disorders believed to originate in the head. Some preparations specified the skull of a person who had died violently. Others valued moss growing on an exposed skull. The logic combined location, vitality, and sympathy. Head treated head, sudden death preserved force. Growth from bone carried something from the person beneath it. Human blood had a different reputation. Blood represented life more directly than dry bone. Freshness increased value. In parts of Europe, people gathered near executions to obtain warm blood from the condemned, believing it could treat epilepsy and other conditions. The executioner occupied an unusual position in this economy. He was feared and socially isolated, yet he controlled access to valuable bodies. He might sell fat, blood, rope, or other materials associated with death. A profession considered dishonorable became a source of healing power. Death created medical authority. Human fat was applied to wounds and painful joints. Physicians and healers used it in ointments. Recently executed bodies supplied a convenient source because the state already possessed the corpse. This was not an ancient Egyptian trade. It was local. The customer could live within walking distance of the gallows. The popularity of corpse medicine complicates the claim that Europeans swallowed mummy only because of a translation mistake. The mistake opened the door. Existing beliefs kept it open. People already accepted that human material could carry medicinal qualities. Mummy fitted these ideas and added the prestige of age. Even after some physicians understood that the original mumia meant mineral pitch, human remedies continued. The body had become pharmacology in its own right. Why did people believe one body could heal another? Several explanations overlapped, could treat like a skull, might cure a head disorder, Blood might restore blood. Healthy young flesh might transfer strength. A violently dead person might retain life force that had not been exhausted by slow disease. Preservation suggested resistance to corruption. Religious ideas about body and spirit shaped some interpretations, while alchemical and chemical medicine shaped others. Not every physician accepted every explanation. The same ingredient survived under several theories. This flexibility is important because early modern medicine was changing rapidly. Anatomists studied bodies directly. Chemical physicians challenged older Galenic traditions. Natural philosophers experimented with air, circulation, and matter. Religious conflict changed attitudes toward relics, miracles, and the body. Mummy could be described as an ancient mineral, a chemical preparation, a preserved tissue, or a carrier of vital spirit. It moved between systems. A drug able to speak several medical languages can survive disagreement. The use of human remains also exposes the importance of class. Whose body became medicine? Rarely the body of the person buying it. Poor people sold teeth. Executed criminals supplied fat and blood. Unclaimed bodies entered anatomy. Ancient Egyptians supplied mummy without consent. The wealthy converted vulnerable bodies into health. The direction of movement was predictable. Material traveled upward. Risk traveled downward. The patient could separate himself morally from the source because several workers stood between them. A grave robber opened the tomb. A merchant bought the body. A ship carried the fragment. An apothecary ground it. A physician prescribed it. The patient swallowed a powder. No single person performed the whole act. Distance divided responsibility. This too remains familiar in modern commodity chains. People accept products they would reject if forced to watch their production. Mumia was a global commodity before the word globalization existed. European writers condemned cannibalism elsewhere, while consuming human remains at home. This contradiction deserves more than a simple accusation of hypocrisy. The two practices were placed into different categories. Cannibalism was imagined as food, ritual, savagery, or violence. Mummy was medicine. Category changed judgment. A person swallowing corpse powder did not believe he was eating a meal. The dose was small. It came from an apothecary. It served health. The body had been transformed through drying, grinding, measuring, and prescription. The medical setting removed social relationship between consumer and consumed. The Egyptian person did not appear as an ancestor, enemy, victim, or member of a community. The person appeared as substance. This absence made consumption easier. European reports about cannibalism in the Americas were often exaggerated, misunderstood, or used to justify conquest. The label marked other people as uncivilized. At the same time, European pharmacies sold skull, blood, fat, and mummy. Some contemporary thinkers noticed the contradiction. Michel de Montaigne compared alleged cannibal customs with European violence and challenged the confidence with which one culture called another barbaric. The point was not that all forms of consuming human remains were identical. They were not. The point was that moral certainty followed power. Europeans named their own practice medicine. They named another practice savagery. Religion added another layer. Christian Europe placed enormous importance upon bodily resurrection, burial, relics, and the remains of saints. Human bone could be sacred in one context and pharmaceutical in another. A saint's relic might be protected in a church. An anonymous Egyptian's bone could be powdered in a shop. Identity determined respect. The ancient foreign dead possessed mystery but not legal protection. The mummy trade also relied upon a strange form of admiration. Europeans valued Egypt as ancient, wise, and powerful. They studied pyramids, hieroglyphs, astronomy, and medicine. They imagined hidden knowledge preserved from the beginning of civilization. This admiration did not produce respect for Egyptian bodies. It produced demand. The more ancient the culture appeared, the more valuable its dead became. Egyptian prestige was consumed, literally. A medicine made from an English neighbor might provoke horror. A medicine from a distant Egyptian burial felt abstract. Geographical distance softened moral discomfort. So did time. The body was ancient enough to seem ownerless. No living relative stood in the shop to object. The patient treated age as permission. Modern archaeology rejects this assumption. Age does not erase personhood. Human remains require ethical care, whether the person died recently or thousands of years ago. Museums now debate display, research, repatriation, and consent. Practices differ among institutions and countries, but the central question has changed. The body is not merely a material, it represents someone. The mummy medicine trade shows what happens when this recognition disappears. The body becomes easy to divide. A head is a curiosity. A hand is a souvenir. A torso is stock. A powder is a dose. The original person vanishes through classification. Medicine does not automatically make the process humane. A beneficial treatment can ethically use donated human tissue with consent and regulation. A harmful treatment can exploit the dead while claiming science. The difference lies in evidence, consent, and respect. Mumia possessed almost none of the three. Let us return to the apothecary shop and examine how a customer might choose among products. The jar marked Mumia may stand beside myrrh, aloes, rhubarb, senna, opium, and mineral drugs. The shop smells of dried plants, vinegar, alcohol, spice, smoke, and substances less pleasant. The customer does not pick up a package and read a standard dose. He speaks to the apothecary. The apothecary asks about symptoms. A physician's written instruction may guide the preparation, but many customers seek advice directly from the person behind the counter. Professional boundaries are changing. The apothecary must decide how much trust to place in suppliers. A shipment arrives with claims. He examines the material. True mummy is often described as dark, dry, resinous, and strong-smelling. But these qualities can be manufactured. A counterfeit treated with pitch may look more convincing than an authentic body prepared without bitumen. The best fake can pass the expected test more easily than the real product. Price becomes another signal. Expensive material feels authentic. Cheap material raises suspicion. The dealer can therefore increase trust by increasing cost. Luxury protects fraud. The customer may also ask whether the material came from a young body or an ancient one. Different writers preferred different qualities. Some sought flesh, saturated with embalming substances. Others wanted a dry, black consistency. Terms such as Arabian mummy, Egyptian mummy, and true mummy appeared in catalogues and pharmacopoeias. Standardization attempted to control a substance that could not be standardized. The name became more exact, while the material remained uncertain. Imagine the dose being prepared. The apothecary places a small paper on the scale. He adds mummy powder. The balance moves. Another ingredient follows. The powders are folded into a packet or mixed with liquid. The final medicine may be brown, bitter, and gritty. The customer takes it home. The jar stays in the shop. Nothing in the transaction reveals the tomb. The patient's experience depends upon the complaint. For a bruise, the powder might be swallowed or incorporated into an external application. For bleeding, it could be given with wine. For pain, it could join ingredients that sedate. For epilepsy, it might appear beside remedies shaped by astrology and sympathy. The same mummy serves several roles because the prescribing system focuses upon qualities rather than one measurable active compound. Modern pharmacology asks which molecule changes which biological process at which dose and what risks follow. Pre-modern medicine could ask different questions. What has this substance survived? What qualities does it possess? What part of the world produced it? What authority recommended it? What does its appearance suggest? These questions generated real knowledge in some cases. Observation of plants and minerals produced effective treatments. But analogy can mislead when physical resemblance replaces mechanism. A preserved body looks resistant to decay. That does not make it a medicine for living tissue. The apothecary's careful weighing could not correct a false premise. Precision is not accuracy. One can measure the wrong substance perfectly. The small metal weights, labeled jar and written recipe, created an appearance of control. This appearance helped patients trust medicine during a period when diagnosis itself was uncertain. The ceremony of preparation mattered. The sound of grinding, the movement of the scale, the folding of the paper, professional action calmed fear. The patient may sleep after taking the dose. By morning, the bruise appears darker before it begins to fade naturally. The family credits the mummy. The story enters household memory. Years later, someone recommends the same remedy to a neighbor. No book is required. Successful tradition can grow from one ordinary recovery. Mummy medicine survived partly because the diseases it treated were difficult to measure. Bleeding appears clear, but internal bleeding is not. A physician might diagnose blood trapped within the body after a fall. Pain, swelling, dizziness, and weakness could support the idea. Mumia, with its reputation for dissolving clotted blood or controlling injury, seemed appropriate. If the patient improved, the diagnosis and treatment confirmed one another. If the patient died, no one could examine the internal damage with modern imaging. Uncertainty protected the prescription. Epilepsy created another difficult field. Seizures occur unpredictably. A person may have several in one period and none for weeks. Any remedy taken before a natural pause appears effective. Human skull, blood, and mummy entered this space because the nervous system was poorly understood and because sudden bodily movement inspired theories of hidden forces. A cure could gain a reputation after one remission. The next seizure might be blamed upon the wrong phase of the moon, the patient's diet, or an insufficient dose. Chronic pain followed the same pattern. Pain changes with rest, weather, stress, movement, and time. A medicine can appear powerful when taken near the natural end of a painful episode. Without comparison groups, memory selects the successful occasion. People forget the doses that did nothing. Mumia also benefited from imprecise diagnostic language. One word could describe several different conditions. A remedy said to treat a flux, obstruction, or internal injury might be used for patients whose diseases had little in common. A few improved for unrelated reasons. The category gained evidence. This does not mean physicians never learned from failure. They did. Medical practice changed through observation, debate, and accumulated experience. Paré's rejection of mummy is one example. Apothecaries and doctors removed remedies they found useless or dangerous. But learning was slow when records were inconsistent and commercial incentives encouraged survival. A bad drug could outlive several careful critics. Printed books spread both doubt and error. The printing press increased access to medical knowledge. Recipes appeared in professional texts, household manuals, herbals, and collections of secrets. A recommendation could cross borders faster than before. So could a warning. Paré's criticism circulated. Descriptions of fraud circulated. Yet the old recipes remained available beside them. Printing did not create automatic agreement. It made disagreement permanent. Readers selected authorities they trusted. A university physician might value classical texts. A chemical practitioner might value Paracelsian preparations. A household healer might value a recipe used by relatives. A merchant valued the catalogue. Each source built a different map of medicine. Mummy remained somewhere on all of them for a long time. The drug's ancient origin also discouraged experimentation. To test mummy properly, a practitioner would need consistent samples. No such samples existed. One batch came from resinous ancient tissue, another from recent flesh, another from animal material. Comparing them measured the inconsistency of the trade rather than one drug. The failure to define the substance made evidence almost impossible to organize. Modern medicine begins by asking, what exactly is being tested? Mumia often failed at the first question. By the 17th century, debates about mummy had become debates about matter itself. Natural philosophers investigated minerals, resins, decay, preservation, and the composition of bodies. Chemists developed new techniques for distillation and analysis. Collectors assembled cabinets containing ancient remains, rare drugs, stones, plants, and anatomical specimens. Mummy sat at the boundary between categories. Was it a mineral because of the bitumen? An animal substance because it came from human flesh? An artificial compound created by embalming? An antiquity? A medicine? The answer changed with the observer. This unstable identity helped mummy move from the pharmacy into other collections. A fragment could be stored as evidence of Egyptian embalming. A head could be displayed as a curiosity. A sample could be tested by a chemist. A body could be unwrapped before a learned audience. The medical question gradually shifted. Instead of asking how mummy cured disease, investigators asked how Egyptians preserved bodies. This was progress, but it did not automatically produce respect. The mummy still served European curiosity. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Scientific interest increasingly replaced medicinal use. Researchers examined wrappings, resins, bones, teeth, and organs. Some unwrappings took place privately. Others became public events, combining lecture, anatomy, and performance. The body moved from mortar to theatre. It was no longer swallowed, it was opened. The distinction matters because popular retellings often combine several centuries into one image of Europeans endlessly eating, burning, and unwrapping mummies for amusement. These activities overlapped, but they did not mean the same thing. Mummy medicine belonged especially to medieval and early modern pharmacology, remaining in some catalogues later. Public unwrapping belonged strongly to 19th century scientific culture and Egyptomania. Mummy brown pigment belonged to art materials. Tourist souvenirs belonged to travel and collecting. A body could move through more than one category, but historical sequence should not disappear. One early 19th century investigator, Augustus Bozzy Granville, performed a detailed examination of an Egyptian mummy and presented his findings to the Royal Society. His work is often described as an early, full scientific autopsy of a mummy. Granville attempted to identify sex, age, disease, and embalming method. Some conclusions were later corrected. The examination nevertheless shows a new form of authority. The mummy was no longer medicine because it preserved others. It became evidence because it preserved itself. Scientific study brought valuable knowledge. Human remains can reveal diet, disease, injury, age, ancestry, embalming methods, and social conditions. Modern imaging allows researchers to examine a body without unwrapping it physically. Chemical analysis identifies resins and bitumen. Radiocarbon dating tests age. CT scans reveal bones and amulets beneath linen. The same human body, once sold as anonymous powder, can now return information about an individual life. The ethical difference depends upon how that knowledge is sought and used. Early investigators did not always ask whether the dead person should be opened. Possession was treated as permission. A collector bought the mummy. A society owned it. An audience wanted to see inside. The body's original cultural meaning had little power in the room. Modern institutions increasingly recognize this problem. Policies now consider dignity, descendant communities, cultural affiliation, research value, and alternatives to destructive study. The change is incomplete, but the question is present. The mummy medicine trade operated before anyone with power asked it. As medicinal demand declined, ground mummy found another market in color. Mummy brown was a pigment made, at least in some preparations, from ground human or animal mummified remains mixed with other materials. It produced a transparent brown, useful for shadows and glazing. Artists valued brown. Historical painting required earth, wood, leather, darkness, flesh, smoke, and old interiors. A warm, transparent pigment could unify a surface. Mummy supplied the tone. The name did not always guarantee composition. Like the medicine, the pigment varied. Some products called mummy brown may have relied more upon bitumen or other brown materials than human remains. Others contained genuine mummy. Again, the label promised more certainty than the tube. The pigment extended the destruction of bodies after physicians had begun rejecting them as drugs. A person could become color, flesh, painted flesh. Ancient remains helped shade scenes from European history, religion, and myth. The irony is almost too neat, which is why the story has survived. A famous later anecdote concerns the artist Edward Burne-Jones. According to family recollection, when he learned that a tube of mummy brown contained actual human remains, he was horrified and gave it a burial in the garden. The story may have been polished in memory, but it captures a shift in perception. The pigment changed morally once the ingredient became visible. Before explanation, it was brown paint. After explanation, it was somebody. Artists did not all respond the same way. Some knew the origin and used the pigment. Others may have assumed the name was fanciful. Supply dealers continued selling products under old labels even as composition changed. The decline followed several pressures. Genuine mummy became harder to obtain. Alternative pigments improved. Public attitudes changed. Human remains acquired a different ethical status. A color that depended upon grave robbery became unnecessary. This part of the story offers a useful contrast with medicine. In both cases, transformation concealed origin. Grinding made body into powder. Mixing made powder into another product. The final user saw dose or color rather than person. Awareness reversed the transformation. Once the customer imagined a hand, face, or burial, the product became difficult to use. The same principle applies to modern material culture. Many objects appear clean because production is distant. A battery hides a mine. A garment hides a factory. A food package hides an animal. A museum label can hide a grave. Ethical understanding begins when the chain becomes visible. Mumia is an extreme example. The product was literally human, yet the market made that fact easy to forget. Why did mummy medicine finally decline? No single discovery ended it. The drug weakened as several supports failed. First, physicians and surgeons published criticism based upon experience. Mummy did not reliably stop bleeding or cure injury. It caused unpleasant effects. Fraud made every sample suspect. Second, natural history clarified the distinction between mineral bitumen, embalming substances, and human tissue. The original confusion became harder to defend. Third, pharmacy moved toward greater regulation and standardization. Professional institutions, official pharmacopoeias, and chemical analysis demanded clearer ingredients. Fourth, new medicines offered more predictable effects. Fifth, attitudes toward the human body changed. The result was gradual. Mummy remained widely used from the medieval period through the 17th century and lingered later. Some catalogues continued listing it after many physicians had abandoned it. Old remedies rarely disappear everywhere at once. A drug can die in elite medicine and survive in local practice. It can disappear from prescriptions but remain in shops. It can leave pharmacy and enter folklore. Dates, therefore, require caution. There was no final morning when every jar was emptied. The decline also did not mean medicine became immediately scientific or safe. 18th century patients still faced mercury, excessive bleeding, dangerous purges, and poorly tested compounds. Removing mummy solved one problem inside a much larger field. Progress is often selective. A culture recognizes one absurdity while preserving another. Chemical medicine itself produced new dangers, Stronger isolation and purification allowed more controlled dosing, but also concentrated toxic substances. Industrial production expanded both effective drugs and harmful patent medicines. The lesson is not that natural remedies were replaced by perfect science. The lesson is that defining substances made testing possible. Once mummy meant several incompatible things, evaluation failed. Once a drug required known composition, Mumia could not survive. Pharmacy regulation also changed the commercial relationship. Apothecaries and later pharmacists increasingly worked within professional structures. Inspection, training, standard books, and legal responsibility limited some forms of substitution. Fraud never disappeared. It became more difficult to defend as normal uncertainty. A merchant could no longer claim that any dark flesh was close enough. Changing contact with Egypt had contradictory effects. More travel and archaeology increased European removal of antiquities and bodies. At the same time, direct study weakened old fantasies about embalming. Researchers learned that natron drying, not a universal miracle drug, preserved the dead. Knowledge ended one form of consumption while encouraging another form of possession. The mummy left the stomach and entered the museum. Modern medicine still uses human-derived material. Blood transfusion, organ transplantation, skin grafts, bone grafts, donated cells, and tissue products can save lives. This does not make them equivalent to corpse medicine. Evidence shows benefit. Donors or families provide consent under legal systems. Materials are tested, matched, processed, documented, and traced. Risks remain, and systems can be abused, but the ethical and scientific framework is different. Mummy medicine had human origin without consent and therapeutic claim without proof. The comparison clarifies why one practice is medicine and the other is exploitation. The human body is not automatically forbidden as a source of treatment. It requires conditions the mummy trade did not meet. A closer look at medical recipes shows why the trade cannot be reduced to one standard spoonful of powder. Mumia appeared in different forms. Some recipes called for a small quantity dissolved in wine. Others mixed it with plant extracts, resins, spices, or mineral ingredients. It could be swallowed, made into pills, applied to a wound, or included in a plaster. The intended action changed with the preparation. A powder taken internally belonged to one theory. A sticky dressing placed over an injury belonged to another. The same name covered both. External use may have seemed especially convincing. A dark, resinous substance spread across cloth could create a physical barrier. Wine or vinegar cleaned the area to some degree. Honey, oils, or plant ingredients in the same dressing could affect moisture and irritation. If the wound improved, the mummy received credit. The patient never knew which component mattered. Internal preparations were harder to justify through direct physical action. Physicians describe mumia as strengthening, drying, resolving clotted blood, resisting corruption, and helping the body after falls or blows. These words belong to medical systems in which the qualities of a substance guided use. Dry matter could dry. Preserved matter could preserve. A material from a body might act upon another body. The reasoning followed resemblance and reputation rather than a tested active ingredient. The amount prescribed varied because strength could not be measured. One fragment contained resin, Another contained bone. Another contained mostly darkened tissue. An apothecary could weigh equal quantities and deliver unequal drugs. The scale solved only mass. It could not solve composition. Taste also changed the patient's judgment. A bitter, smoky, resinous medicine felt serious. Pleasant remedies could appear weak, while unpleasant ones seemed powerful enough to defeat illness. Mumia benefited from this expectation. The more offensive the powder, the easier it was to believe that it contained concentrated force. Paré's reports of foul breath and vomiting challenged this interpretation, but other practitioners could read the same effects as evidence of action. The body reacted, therefore the drug worked. Medical recipes often instructed the practitioner to combine ingredients according to condition, age, strength, and season. This flexibility allowed skilled care, but it also prevented clean evaluation. If a patient improved, the recipe was praised. If the patient worsened, the dose could be blamed. If nothing happened, the quality of the mummy could be questioned. No failure reached the drug itself. Household medicine added another layer. Elite and middling households kept recipe books containing remedies exchanged among relatives, neighbors, physicians, and servants. Women often supervised the preparation of medicines alongside food, preserves, cosmetics, and household supplies. A recipe associated with a respected family could travel for generations. The source might be written in the margin. Proved by Lady So-and-so. Given by Doctor Such-and-such. Good for a fall. The authority was social rather than experimental. Mumia could enter this world through a physician's prescription and remain after the physician was gone. A household purchased a small quantity because it was expensive. The jar waited. Years later, someone used it for another injury. The medicine became family property. Its long presence created its own proof. Surely no one would have kept it so carefully if it were useless. This is how remedies survive beyond the circumstances that created them. A translation error becomes a professional habit. A professional habit becomes a household recipe. A household recipe becomes tradition. By the time a critic arrives, the medicine has accumulated memories. Evidence must compete not only with books, but with grandparents. The patient's body also mattered to the recommendation. A wealthy adult, injured while hunting, might receive mummy because the household could obtain it quickly. A poor laborer with the same injury might receive local herbs, rest, pressure, or nothing. The rare drug therefore became associated with cases that attracted attention and care. Better food, warmth, nursing, and time improved the wealthy patient's chance of recovery. Mummy appeared beside the recovery and inherited the result. Class created false clinical evidence. Physicians serving powerful clients had another reason to prescribe elaborate remedies. Doing little could look negligent. A king, nobleman, or merchant expected treatment worthy of rank. Imported ingredients signaled that the practitioner had used every available resource. A simple bandage might be effective. A bandage containing Egyptian mummy looked exceptional. The treatment performed status while treating the wound. This performance should not be mistaken for deliberate fraud in every case. Many practitioners believed in the medicine. They inherited respected texts. They watched patients recover. They worked without tools capable of separating coincidence from cause. Sincerity and error can occupy the same prescription. The merchant who sold a recently prepared corpse as ancient Egyptian mummy committed deception. The physician who prescribed it in good faith committed a different mistake. The patient experienced both as medicine. The trade therefore contained several levels of knowledge. Some sellers knew their stock was false. Some suspected. Some believed a supplier. Some physicians understood the bitumen confusion. Others did not. Some patients knew they were swallowing human remains. Others may have imagined only an exotic resin. There was no single European mind deciding what mummy meant. There were thousands of transactions held together by one unstable word. The word's instability made it unusually profitable. A precise commodity has limits. Mumia could expand. If natural asphalt was unavailable, embalming resin could replace it. If resin was unavailable, preserved flesh could replace it. If ancient flesh was unavailable, recent flesh could replace it. If human flesh was unavailable, animal material could be darkened. Every shortage produced a new interpretation. The market never needed to admit that the original drug had disappeared. It only needed to rename the substitute as another kind of truth. This elasticity helps explain why labels such as True Egyptian Mummy appeared. The label did not create certainty. It created a premium category above the ordinary uncertainty. Customers who feared fraud paid more. Fraud increased the value of the word genuine. The dishonest trade strengthened the honest seller's price. Apothecaries sometimes relied upon sensory tests. The material should be dark. It should have a particular density. It should smell resinous or bituminous. It should break in a certain way. But a counterfeiter who knew the tests could manufacture the answers. Pitch produced darkness. Drying produced hardness. Spices produced aroma. Old cloth produced age. The quality test became the recipe for the fake. Modern counterfeit medicines use a similar principle. A tablet copies color, shape, packaging, and taste. The buyer sees every expected sign except the active ingredient. Pre-modern mummy fraud copied the sensory identity of a drug whose active ingredient had never been defined. The counterfeit copied an appearance built around a misunderstanding. That made detection almost impossible. The Alexandria dealer associated with Guy de la Fontaine understood this perfectly. A buyer wanted ancient bodies treated with valuable embalming substances. The dealer supplied recent bodies made to look ancient. Cause of death did not matter, because preparation erased visible difference. Disease became hidden inside color. The customer's confidence depended upon not seeing the process. Imagine the preparation without accepting every later account as an exact recipe. A corpse is obtained. The body is emptied or dried. Dark material is applied. Heat and sun reduce moisture. Spices or pitch create the expected smell. The result does not need to fool an anatomist beside the original grave. It needs to fool a merchant after transport. Distance completes the counterfeit. Bodies of enslaved people and the poor were especially available because power determines which dead receive protection. A wealthy family guards a tomb. A state honors a noble corpse. An anonymous body can disappear. The mummy trade followed the same inequality visible in anatomy, execution, and grave robbery. Medicine consumed people whose objections carried no force. The Egyptian authorities who restricted tomb opening were not simply protecting a modern concept of archaeology. Their motives could include religion, law, public order, control of trade, and revenue. Whatever the motive, prohibition acknowledged that bodies and burials were not free material. European demand encouraged evasion. Smuggling turned legal boundary into cost. The port city became a place where several worlds met. European merchants sought drugs and antiquities. Local dealers assembled stock. Officials inspected or accepted payment. Sailors moved cargo they may not have understood. Physicians asked questions about embalming. Travelers repeated stories. The mummy changed meaning at every exchange. In the tomb it was a person. In the warehouse it was stock. At customs it was a prohibited or taxable good. On the ship it was weight. In the pharmacy it was medicine. This chain also produced information, though information traveled less reliably than bodies. A physician visiting Egypt could learn that merchants manufactured false mummies. A traveler could observe that not all dark corpses contained bitumen. A merchant could report methods of burial. These reports reached Europe and challenged old assumptions. Yet the drug remained on shelves because trade can continue after belief weakens. Customers do not all receive new information at once. A Parisian physician reads a warning. A provincial apothecary continues using an older book. A household repeats a recipe. A merchant sells remaining stock. Decline spreads unevenly. History rarely changes everywhere on publication day. The growth of chemical medicine did not immediately clarify the issue. Paracelsian and related traditions encouraged the search for concentrated virtues in natural and bodily substances. Distillation, extraction, and transformation promised to separate useful essence from crude matter. This could weaken faith in raw mummy. It could also strengthen it. If a corpse contained hidden vitality, chemistry might release it. Some practitioners valued the body of a person who died suddenly because life was thought to remain within matter after the soul departed. A slow disease exhausted vitality. A violent death interrupted it. The recently dead criminal, therefore, offered something an ancient mummy did not: youth, strength, unspent life. Corpse medicine could move from preservation to vitality without abandoning the human body. The executed body became an unofficial pharmacy. Blood served one remedy. Fat served another. Skull served another. Skin, bone, and moss could enter separate traditions. The state killed the person. The medical market distributed the remains. Punishment continued after death as utility. This practice existed beside public anatomy. Executed criminals could be dissected as an additional penalty. The body educated surgeons and frightened spectators. Parts might also enter private collections or remedies. The dead criminal lost control in several directions. Law, science, and medicine all claimed the body. Mumia from Egypt differed because the people had not been condemned by a European court. Their bodies were simply distant enough to become available. Ancient age functioned like a sentence without trial. The person was treated as beyond ownership. Theories of sympathetic medicine made human ingredients appealing. A substance connected to one part of the body could influence the same part in a patient. Skull treated head, blood treated blood. fat softened or relieved, mummy preserved. The logic formed a map of resemblance. It was easy to remember and difficult to test. The doctrine of signatures offered a related style of reasoning in plant medicine, where shape, color, or habitat suggested therapeutic use. Not every physician accepted it, and it should not be used to explain all pre-modern remedies. Still, resemblance carried persuasive force in many traditions. Mummy offered the largest signature of all. It was a body that had resisted decay. What better sign could a medicine for damaged bodies display? The error lay in confusing the outcome of treatment applied after death with a property transferable to the living. Natron dried tissue. Resin coated it. Desert conditions reduced moisture. None of these processes restored life. Preservation looked like health only from a distance. A living body requires circulation, repair, immune response, hydration, and metabolism. A mummy survives because those processes have stopped. The same dryness that preserves the dead would destroy the living. The visual analogy reverses biology. What benefits a corpse cannot be assumed to benefit a patient. Early physicians did not possess this modern framework, but practical experience could still reveal failure. Paré saw that mummy did not stop blood as promised. Other critics questioned the merchants. Natural philosophers analyzed material. Repeated doubt slowly weakened analogy. Observation pulled the dead body out of metaphor. The 17th century apothecary Pierre Pommet later described commercial drugs and the mummy trade in works that circulated widely. His discussions show that mummy remained a recognized commodity, while fraud was openly acknowledged. This coexistence is striking. A market can know it is corrupt and continue. Customers respond by seeking a better supplier rather than abandoning the product. Mumia also entered collections of curiosities. A labeled sample could sit between medicine and natural history. The collector preserved it not necessarily to prescribe, but to represent the world's substances. The jar became evidence of trade, antiquity, and foreign custom. When use declined, collection preserved memory. A gift of mumia could carry diplomatic or scholarly value. The material was rare, Eastern, and connected to royal cabinets. By the 18th century, some specimens were classified and displayed rather than consumed. The shift from pharmacy to cabinet changed the question. What can this cure? Became, what exactly is this? Classification exposed contradiction. Natural bitumen belonged with minerals. Resin belonged with plant products and compounds. Human tissue belonged with anatomical material. One jar could not comfortably occupy all three. The old word began to break apart. Improved chemical understanding also reduced the glamour of blackness. A dark substance no longer proved special origin. Chemists could compare solubility, odor, burning behavior, and composition. Bitumen could be identified as a geological material rather than bodily essence. Embalming became a process using several ingredients rather than one mysterious balm. The mummy lost its single secret. Official pharmacopoeias gradually changed which drugs practitioners were expected to recognize and prepare. Removal from an authoritative list weakened demand. A drug absent from current professional standards became old-fashioned. Apothecaries still sold what customers requested, But professional legitimacy moved elsewhere. The shelf changed slowly. The book changed first. Regulation did not arise only from concern for patients. Professional groups also sought control over trade, training, and competition. Yet even self-interested regulation could improve quality. Known ingredients and inspection made certain frauds harder. Mumia could not meet a standard it had never possessed. Changing taste mattered as much as changing science. The human body became increasingly disturbing as an ingestible source. Corpse medicine did not vanish because Europeans suddenly discovered respect, but disgust gained influence. A remedy once described as ancient began to look dirty. Fashion turned against it. Disgust alone is not a reliable guide to medicine. Vaccination, surgery, transplantation, and anatomical study have all provoked disgust while producing benefit. But when a remedy lacks benefit, disgust can remove the last reason to tolerate it. Mummy had no strong evidence to defend itself. Once prestige faded, only the corpse remained. The later survival of Mummy in catalogues should therefore not be mistaken for continued universal practice. A product can remain listed because stock exists, because a few customers request it, or because catalogs copy older catalogs. Availability does not equal common use. The final century of a drug is often a long administrative echo. Modern laboratory analysis has also complicated the old story. Some Egyptian mummies genuinely contain bitumen. Others do not. Use varied over time and social level. Later, less expensive embalming practices appear to have used bitumen more often than some earlier royal preparations. The Europeans who imagined themselves consuming pharaohs may have been more likely to receive the remains of ordinary later Egyptians. Prestige was false, even when the body was ancient. Bitumen itself is chemically complex. Its composition depends upon geological source. Some forms contain sulfur and compounds capable of inhibiting certain microorganisms. This may help explain old external medical uses, but a potentially useful property in natural asphalt does not validate swallowing decomposed human tissue. The distinction must remain clear. Modern toxicology would treat an unidentified powder from an ancient body as contamination, not medicine. It could contain microbes, fungal products, environmental pollutants, embalming chemicals, heavy metals, modern conservation substances, or material introduced during centuries of handling. Even if no acute poison were present, there is no evidence that human mummy cures the conditions for which it was prescribed. The medical question is settled. The historical question remains rich. Current museum practice can study embalming materials with tiny samples or non-invasive tools. CT imaging reveals internal structure. Spectroscopy and chromatography identify compounds. Radiography shows amulets and bones. Researchers can answer questions that early collectors could not imagine. This knowledge makes destructive unwrapping and grinding less necessary. Technology can reduce harm. Respectful research also attempts to restore biography. A mummy is not only evidence of a technique. It is the body of a person who lived within a family, economy, language, and belief system. The medical trade removed biography because biography obstructed consumption. Modern study should move in the opposite direction. The anonymous powder cannot be repaired, but the history can name the process that made it anonymous. Tomb robbery, commercial demand, translation, professional authority, fraud, grinding. Each word restores part of the chain. This longer chain also changes the moral question. It is easy to ask why one patient swallowed mummy. It is harder and more useful to ask why an entire commercial system made mummy available. The patient's decision lasted seconds. The system lasted centuries. The system survived because responsibility was divided. The translator did not open the tomb. The grave robber did not write the prescription. The merchant did not administer the dose. The physician did not see the body. The patient did not know the person. Each participant could claim distance from the whole. Historical explanation brings the whole back together. A word in a medical text reaches a tomb. A tomb reaches a port. A port reaches a shop. A shop reaches a sick room. The patient's hope reaches backward into the burial of a stranger. Once this connection is visible, the jar no longer looks small. To see how all of these forces met, imagine the journey of one body without pretending that every mummy followed exactly the same route. The person dies in Egypt many centuries before the European medicine trade begins. We do not know the person's name, occupation, or family. The burial is not royal. It belongs to a period when mummification is available beyond the pharaoh's household. Though quality still depends upon means. The body is washed and dried. Natron removes moisture. The embalmers treat the skin with oils or resinous material. Internal preparation follows the custom and price available. Linen surrounds the body in repeated layers. The family provides what it can. The burial enters darkness. For generations, the tomb remains closed. The city outside changes. Languages change. Rulers change. Religious life changes. The people who knew the dead person disappear, but the body keeps physical traces of them. Linen records skilled hands. A worn tooth records years of eating. A healed injury records pain survived. The position of the burial records belonging. None of these traces were created for European study. They simply remain. Then the tomb is opened. It may be opened first in antiquity, then entered again centuries later. Looters search for precious objects. A coffin is damaged. Wrappings are disturbed. Sand enters. The body survives because dryness continues to protect it. Preservation makes further destruction possible. A body that decayed completely could not become medicine. The success of the burial attracts the trade that defeats its purpose. A local dealer hears that foreign merchants will pay for mummy. The value is not necessarily high at the tomb. Profit grows with distance. The person doing the dangerous work may receive little compared with the apothecary who sells small doses in Europe. This is common in long commodity chains. The raw material is cheapest where it is taken. The story becomes expensive near the customer. The body is too large for convenient movement. A whole mummy can be sold as a curiosity, but medicine requires weight rather than completeness. The dealer removes part of a limb. Linen tears, resin cracks. A hand separates at a joint already weakened by time. No ritual accompanies the separation. The fragment is wrapped for transport. The rest of the body may remain in the tomb, be sold to another buyer, or be damaged beyond recovery. One person becomes several products. The fragment reaches a port. A merchant examines it. He wants material that looks dark and ancient. If the flesh is pale, dry, or insufficiently resinous, he may judge it poor mummy, even if it is genuinely ancient. Authenticity loses to expectation. A false product with more pitch may receive the better price. The fragment travels by sea. It lies among goods whose origins are equally distant from the final customer. Spices, dyes, gums, cloth, metal, and medicinal plants. Salt air enters the hold. The ship moves through heat and cold. Labels can loosen. Packages can mix. A sailor sees only cargo. The body has now traveled farther after death than the person may have traveled in life. At a European port, a wholesaler divides the shipment. A whole hand might interest a collector, but a damaged section belongs to the drug trade. The fragment passes to an apothecary or intermediary. Its price rises. Each seller adds certainty. Ancient Egyptian, true mummy, rich in balm, suitable for internal injuries. No one can verify the claims, but every claim increases value. The apothecary does not need the complete history. He needs a material listed in recipes. He breaks the fragment into workable pieces. A hammer may begin what the mortar finishes. Bone resists. Dry tissue fractures. Resinous material becomes granules. Linen fibers mix with dust unless removed carefully. The shop fills with the sound of repeated blows. The body loses shape. Once the fingers, skin, and bone no longer resemble anatomy, professional work becomes easier. The powder enters a labeled jar. The label gives it a new identity, more durable than the person's name. Mumia. The word can survive for years after the contents change. When the jar empties, a new batch enters. Ancient body, counterfeit body, animal flesh, resin, or bitumen may occupy the same container in succession. The label remains stable. The dead are interchangeable beneath it. A physician sends a prescription for a patient injured after falling from a horse. The patient has bruising along one side, pain beneath the ribs, and dizziness. There is no X-ray, no ultrasound, no way to know whether an organ is damaged. The physician fears internal bleeding. Mumia has a reputation for injuries and clotted blood. The apothecary measures the powder. The patient drinks it with wine. Perhaps the ribs are only bruised. Perhaps rest, warmth, and time will be enough. Perhaps an active herb in the mixture reduces pain. The patient survives. The household remembers that Egyptian mummy saved him. No one remembers the person whose body supplied the dose. This imagined route is not a record of one identified mummy. It is a reconstruction of stages documented across the trade: burial, opening, separation, transport, classification, grinding, prescription, consumption. The stages explain how an act that sounds impossible became ordinary. No participant needed to confront the entire route. The patient never entered the tomb. The tomb worker never watched the patient drink. If the patient had seen the burial before destruction, the dose might have felt different. If the tomb worker had seen the medicine fail, the trade might have felt different. Distance allowed both ends to preserve useful beliefs. At one end, the body appeared to be foreign demand. At the other, the powder appeared to be ancient cure. The ship carried not only matter, but misunderstanding. The root also explains why numbers are difficult. We cannot count precisely how many mummies became medicine. Shipments were not recorded consistently. Fragments were sold by weight. Counterfeits entered the same category. One body could supply many doses. A product labeled mummy might contain no Egyptian human material at all. Any confident total would pretend the trade was more organized than it was. Absence of a total does not make the practice small or imaginary. Written recipes, apothecary containers, commercial descriptions, travel accounts, medical criticism, and surviving samples all point to a sustained market. The evidence shows presence. It does not permit an exact body count. This distinction matters because sensational history often replaces uncertainty with a dramatic number. A large number attracts attention. A careful explanation attracts trust. The truth here does not need invention. For centuries, respected medical systems allowed anonymous human remains to be sold as treatment. That fact is already large enough. It also reminds us that historical scale should be measured in more than quantity. One destroyed burial is a complete loss to one person's memory. One counterfeit corpse reveals a market willing to use the recently dead. One ineffective prescription reveals the weakness of medical authority. One labeled jar connects all three. The jar looks small because systems often become visible only at their final point. A phone hides a mine and factory. A silk garment hides labor and trade. A spoonful of mummy hid a tomb. To understand the medicine, we must keep the tomb inside the shop. Only then does the dose reveal its true size. The question in our title asks, why Europeans ground Egyptian mummies into medicine? The shortest answer is that they believed mummy contained a valuable medicinal substance known as Mumia, associated with bitumen and preservation. The fuller answer is more complicated. A mineral drug traveled through languages. Its name became attached to dark embalming material. The material became attached to the body. The body inherited the drug's reputation. Merchants turned that reputation into trade. Medical theories found reasons to keep it. Fraud expanded the supply. Prestige protected the product. No single cause is enough. Translation alone does not explain why physicians continued after the confusion became known. Cannibal medicine alone does not explain why Egyptian bodies gained special value. Profit alone does not explain why patients believed. Desperation alone does not explain why learned books prescribed it. The practice survived because all of these forces supported one another. The Egyptian mummy offered several promises at once. It was ancient. It was foreign. It was human. It resisted decay. It looked like the mineral named in respected texts. It arrived through expensive trade. It belonged to a civilization Europeans imagined as medically wise. Few drugs carried so many forms of authority. Almost none of that authority came from controlled evidence. The story also reveals how medicine creates moral distance. A body fragment became an ingredient. An ingredient became a dose. A dose became a line in a recipe. Each step made the human origin less visible. The patient could condemn cannibalism while swallowing mummy because the pharmacy had changed the category. The act felt civilized. The body had been processed. Egypt paid the physical cost. Tombs were opened. Wrappings were torn. Bodies were separated. Names disappeared. Some remains entered medicine. Others entered collections, pigment, display, and entertainment. The individual dead became a European resource. We should also avoid creating a new myth while correcting the old one. Not every European consumed mummy. Not every physician prescribed it. Not every product labeled Mumia contained ancient Egyptian flesh. Not every mummy contained bitumen. Not every story about royal use is equally well documented. The practice was real. Its details were inconsistent. Accuracy makes the story stranger, not less strange. A standardized continent-wide industry would be easier to understand than this unstable market where no one could agree what the drug was. The uncertainty was not a side problem. It was the central condition of the trade. If customers could identify the substance, fraud would fail. If physicians could define the substance, testing could begin. If the dead retained names, commodification would become harder. Mumia survived in the spaces where knowledge was missing. Merchant stories filled them. This is why Ambroise Paré matters. He did not need to solve every mystery of embalming. He asked whether the medicine helped the patient. He observed pain and vomiting. He challenged authority with experience. That question slowly changed the history of the jar. Does it work? Once asked seriously and repeatedly, the ancient label lost power. We can now follow the powder backward one final time. On the apothecary's paper lies a small brown measure. Before the mortar, it was a hard fragment. Before the fragment, it was part of a body. Before the body entered trade, it lay within linen. Before the linen was cut, someone had wrapped it. Before the wrapping, a family or community had prepared a burial. The chain does not begin in a pharmacy. It begins with a person. We do not know the person's name. That ignorance was created, not inevitable. The tomb may once have contained inscriptions. The coffin may have carried a face or title. Amulets may have identified hopes and protection. The body itself held evidence of age, disease, diet, and work. Looting separated these sources. Grinding ended the possibility of recovery. A dose consumed history as well as flesh. Modern researchers sometimes identify people once treated as anonymous specimens. Imaging reveals sex and age. Inscriptions connect a body to a coffin. Family relationships emerge through DNA, where preservation and ethics permit study. Identity can return after centuries of removal. Powder cannot be restored. The mummy medicine trade destroyed information no archive can replace. This loss matters beyond Egyptology. Human remains are biological records. Bones show healed fractures. Teeth preserve childhood stress and diet. Tissue contains disease. Wrappings reveal craft and economy. Resins reveal trade networks. Position within a tomb reveals social relationships. Breaking a body for medicine removed it from all these contexts. The customer gained an ineffective drug. Human knowledge lost a life. The trade also changed how Europeans imagined Egypt. A mummy became less a dead Egyptian than a substance that preserved itself. This image fed fantasies of secret chemistry and ancient power. Real Egyptian medical practice was much richer than powdered corpse. Ancient Egyptian healers used plants, minerals, surgery, observation, ritual, and written knowledge. Their medical papyri describe wounds, diagnosis, and treatment. They did not preserve bodies so future Europeans could eat them. The European medicine called mummy said more about Europe than Egypt. It reflected European translation, trade, professional rivalry, fascination, and appetite. The mummy was the object. The system was European. When we tell the story as a simple joke about foolish people eating pharaohs, we repeat part of the old erasure. Most consumed bodies were probably not pharaohs. The people were not props in a comedy. The practice lasted because institutions supported it. The humor should not hide the structure. A jar on a shelf depended upon graves, ships, money, texts, and authority. The most unsettling detail may not be the powder itself. It may be how ordinary the transaction became. The apothecary opened the jar. The physician wrote the dose. The patient paid. No one needed to feel cruel. Systems can commit disrespect without requiring every participant to enjoy it. That is why systems deserve examination. The room around the apothecary grows quieter now. The customer has taken the packet. The mortar rests on the table. Dust remains in its rough stone surface. The jar returns to the shelf, beside medicines whose names will outlive their ingredients. Outside, carts move through a narrow street. Bells mark the hour. Somewhere a physician visits another patient and writes another recipe. The trade continues because no single transaction looks large enough to stop it. Far away, another tomb is opened. A rope lowers someone into darkness. Candlelight touches linen that has not seen light for centuries. The workers search for objects of value. The body already possesses value because European medicine has given it one. A limb is removed. The burial becomes inventory. Between these two rooms lies the entire story. The tomb does not know the pharmacy. The patient does not know the tomb. Trade connects them while keeping them apart. Distance allows each person to see only one stage. The worker sees a body. The merchant sees cargo. The apothecary sees material. The physician sees a drug. The patient sees hope. Hope is the most powerful part of the chain. A person in pain does not care whether future historians will find the remedy absurd. The person wants to live, sleep, stop bleeding, or avoid another seizure. We should not mock that need. We should examine those who sold certainty into it. Medicine has always worked near fear. This is why evidence matters most where patients are most desperate. The weaker the patient's power, the stronger the responsibility of the practitioner. Mummy medicine reversed that responsibility. Uncertainty became a reason to continue. Mystery became value. Ancient origin replaced proof. Eventually, the jar lost its authority. The word mummy changed again. It no longer meant a common drug. It came to mean the preserved body, the museum figure, the archaeological discovery, and later, the monster of fiction. Most people forgot that it had once appeared in prescriptions. The medicine disappeared so completely that its history now sounds invented. But the jars survived. Books survived. Travel accounts survived. Criticism survived. Fragments survived in collections. Together, they show that the practice was not a legend. Europeans did consume preparations sold as mummy. Some contained ancient Egyptian human remains. Others contained counterfeit bodies animal material, resin, bitumen, or mixtures impossible to identify. The uncertainty belongs to the history. The answer is now complete. Physicians did not begin by deciding that ancient flesh must be delicious or magical. They inherited a medicinal mineral. They misunderstood its relationship to embalmed bodies. They worked within theories that valued preservation and human vitality. They trusted distant suppliers. They repeated authority. They served frightened patients. And merchants learned that a dead body could be sold more than once, first as antiquity, then as medicine, then as pigment, and finally as story. The apothecary closes the wooden jar. The lid settles into place. No name is written beneath it, only mummy. One word covering mineral, resin, flesh, fraud, medicine, and the remains of someone who never consented to become any of them. For now, the shop is dark, the street is quiet, the mortar will not begin again until morning. And somewhere beyond the sea, beneath the dry earth of Egypt, the dead who remain undisturbed continue the long sleep their burials were meant to protect.